right from the outset, I've been saying that certainly the Hamas leadership are, to use that slightly hackneyed expression, dead men walking. The Israelis will just pursue and hunt down the senior leadership of Hamas to the ends of the earth.
I'm going to start off this next hour of the program by looking at the developing story, the huge story in the Middle East after that overnight airstrike, which killed Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran. Iran, of course, pointing a finger at Israel as being the culprits behind that, what happened there, promising harsh punishment towards the state for what happened. Now, where does it leave this conflict? Where does it go from here? I want to first of all bring into the program and ask Greg Karlstrom what he thinks. He's a Middle East correspondent at The Economist. Welcome to you, Greg.
Hi, good afternoon.
Greg, good afternoon. Can I ask you first, the action taken by Israel in Beirut and attributed to Israel in Iran, did that come as any kind of shock to you, as someone who knows the area so well?
It did, honestly. The attack in Beirut, I mean, everyone was expecting retaliation for the rocket attack in Majd al-Shams and the Golan Heights on Saturday. Everyone was expecting Israel to do something in Lebanon, but there had been days of diplomacy aimed at dissuading Israel from carrying out an attack on Beirut. And so the fact that they attacked the capital was a bit unexpected. But I think the real surprise was waking up this morning to the news that Haniyeh had been assassinated in Tehran hours after he attended the inauguration of a new Iranian president. That was very unexpected.
Right. Now, we knew perfectly well there was going to be some sort of retaliation after the that strike on the Golan Heights, which killed those Druze children. The cabinet of Israel, we know, gave license to the country's leadership to react in the way that they felt appropriate at the time they felt appropriate, and so then it was up to the leadership to do what they did. I mean, how can one imagine Benjamin Netanyahu figured this was going to play out? Because it could play out, couldn't it? Even now, still in very different ways.
It could. I mean, the strike on Lebanon, the messaging that came out of Israel last night immediately after the strike was that this was a one-off attack, that they considered their retaliation finished. They had targeted this one Hezbollah commander, but there weren't going to be any more follow-on strikes. And so they were trying to make it very clear to Hezbollah that sort of, you hit us, we hit you, and let's call it even. But
Right.
Hezbollah had been warning for days before this that they would consider a strike on Beirut to be crossing a red line, that they would retaliate for that. And so the Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, effectively trying to call their bluff here.
I guess the worry is, Greg, I mean, you will know certainly better than I do, but in a confrontation like this, both sides like to feel, apart from anything else, that they're the ones having the last word.
They do. I mean, we've seen that time and again throughout this war over the past 10 months. And the hope would be that the last word from Hezbollah is what we've seen over the past 10 months, an attack on something in northern Israel that's within the sort of unwritten rules of engagement of this conflict. But exactly what they're going to do is still an open question. And then I think the bigger question right now is what Iran is going to do after the assassination of Haniyeh on their territory. We've heard some very tough rhetoric from the supreme leader on down in Iran saying that this was an attack on their guest on their territory, and there's going to be a harsh response for it.
Do you have a hunch on that, Greg, if you'll forgive a question to which there can be no accurate answer? Any notion of what might happen there?
Well, right. I mean, no one has a clear answer, and if I told you I did, I'd be lying to you. But I think my hunch is that Iran is not going to go to war on behalf of Hamas, even though this attack happened on Iranian soil. If you think about everything that's happened over the past 10 months, there's only been one time when Iran struck directly at Israel. That was back in April, and it was after the assassination of an Iranian general at the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus. So not just Iranian soil, but an Iranian target. In this case, because it was someone from Hamas, I mean, Iran has made it clear for 10 months that they're not going to go to war directly on behalf of Hamas. And so I think they will find either some very symbolic way to retaliate, or they will do it through proxies in the region, rather than doing something that might draw an Israeli reprisal and risk a bigger conflagration.
Right, Greg, thank you. That's Greg Karlstrom there, who's Middle East correspondent at The Economist. I now want to say good afternoon and welcome to Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall. He's a former Middle East advisor at the UK Ministry of Defence. Hello to you, Simon.
Hi, John. Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. Can I ask you this, a bit of a subjective judgment on your part? When you saw the news of, first of all, the attack in Beirut, and then later on, the strike into Tehran, did that strike you as an appropriate reaction by Israel?
Yes, I think so, John. Right from the outset, I've been saying that certainly the Hamas leadership are, to use that slightly hackneyed expression, dead men walking. The Israelis will just pursue and hunt down the senior leadership of Hamas to the ends of the earth. Hezbollah have been given very, very strict warning, strong warning. Don't open up a second front. And quite clearly, they're sending a very strong message to Iran as well. I was interested in listening to your previous speaker, who I rather agree with about what Iran's response will be. They'll have to do something. It will be demonstrative. But I, too, don't believe that Iran wishes, in its current fragile state, frankly, the new president, to open up a major war, state-on-state war with Israel.
Right, and give me as it were, a British perspective, and maybe try to look at it through the lens from Washington D.C. as well, because you know, in your past role would have done precisely that, trying to look at what America's thinking, communicate with America. What is the role of America, and for that matter, Britain now? Because Antony Blinken, I think he's made pretty clear, Washington had no heads up about what was about to happen before it did.
No, well, this is always the danger in these situations, John, and you'll know it well. Um, uh, I hate to say, with the Americans, I remember in Kabul, we had no heads up. Keeping lines of communication between officials, certainly so that they can at least warn off political masters, is really important with this, because it's very much a case of what am I looking at? What does this mean? What does this involve? What are you trying to say? And where things are done without pre-warning, they make reactions very, on the hoof, and things that were not intended begin to happen, and people overreact or underreact. So it is very worrying. America is, of course, the greatest supporter of Israel. One keeps forgetting just what a quantitative difference there is between the American contribution to both Ukraine and Israel compared to anybody else. And so Israel has to be very careful about how it plays its great ally, America, when it carries out such things. Equally, it knows that the Americans will urge caution because they're very conscious of not wanting to widen the conflict, but probably are not terribly surprised that this is what the Israelis have done, given they've seen an opportunity to do so.
Yes, yes, and I know, Simon, I'm leaping all sorts of fences before we come to them, but inevitably, one finds oneself
Inevitable.
doing
It's all
that.
connected, John, as you well know.
Yeah, indeed. And so while we wait to see what is to be the response of Tehran, but while we wait to see what is the response, the connected response of Hezbollah, you have to wonder, has this completely extinguished hope of any kind of ceasefire deal? And so far, Simon, a number of commentators who know what they're talking about think it's not necessarily the end of hopes for a ceasefire. What do you think?
No, I agree, John. I mean, the interesting thing, Hanaya, people always said that people speculated that what happened on the 7th of October had not been cleared by him or even briefed to him. The Israelis were not going to attack Hanaya in Qatar, where, of course, his whereabouts were well known. That's where he was seen celebrating the 7th of October. But quite clearly, they saw a chance to get Hanaya when he was in Tehran and send a message to Hamas as well as they did to the Hezbollah and the Iranians. The danger of what the IDF have been doing and Hamas is it's quite difficult to see what their political objectives are at the end of 10 months, how they bring this to a close. At the moment, of course, Hamas still have hostages, but the people who are the most victims of what they're doing or what they did do are the Palestinian people. So somewhere along the line, people are looking for an off-ramp, I would suspect.
Yes.
But it's a difficult off-ramp given the emotional investment both sides have in this conflict.
And do you think then, do you believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, is one of those who is looking for an off-ramp? Because it's not a piece of cynicism, it's objective analysis to say that Benjamin Netanyahu sees advantage to him in keeping tension high, keeping the conflict going.
I know. Well, this so much, John, boils down to internal Israeli politics. Benny Gantz broke from the coalition. We know there's an awful lot of internal unrest and unease in Israel about the path that Israel is locked on. Inevitably, the Israelis close ranks when there's a threat. There's 100,000 or something like that Israelis who've evacuated northern Israel. They want to go back there. And so it's a question of, do you signal and say, thus far and no further, but we could up it, let's come to an agreement, or do you signal, right, we're waiting for whatever you do next? So communication is really, really important at this stage, because these things, history is littered with examples of where situations, one side thought they were controlling it, one side thought they had the message, one side thought they had a narrative, and it spins out of control because the others don't quite understand what the opponents are thinking.
Right. I'm just going to finish with a thought about Britain. I don't suggest that Britain is a major player in this drama, but it is a player. But I suppose, in a sense, at this point, Britain, the British government, the newly installed British government, is pretty much like the rest of us, a spectator. Is that fair?
Yes, up to a point. I think we are an influential spectator. We are, of course, part of the P5 at the UN. We are a lead member of NATO, Commonwealth. There's a whole raft of fora in which we have a voice where we can usefully, bring some influence to bear. And we absolutely must. There's a humanitarian crisis at the heart of this, and an awful lot of very, very dangerous implications if it does go out of control. So we shouldn't underestimate what we can bring to the party. Equally, you're quite right. We need to be very realistic and and clear-sighted about our capacity to actually change Hamas's opinions, Israel's opinions, Iran's opinions, etc. But we've got to keep engaged because we do have a role, and we are still a major global player.
Right, Simon. Really, really helpful to get your thoughts. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.